June 18, 1986, one day after the Celtics selected Len Bias in the NBA draft, he was taking care of business and enjoying the fruits of his popularity and excellence on the basketball court.
Len had signed a Reebok contract that night. I was at the party and was with Len and his agent, and went home, said goodbye to them as they were heading off to go back to Washington, D.C.
He called me just before he left Boston to come back home to thank me for everything I'd done for him, and to tell me that he had signed a $1.5 million contract with Reebok.
Once he came in, we all went running to the door, and we were so happy. I can really remember him thanking my dad, just saying, "Thank you, Daddy. Just thank you so much for everything. It was all worth it. This is what I've been working for."
Later that night, Bias returned to his campus suite and chatted with his teammates and girlfriend Madeline Woods. About 1 a.m., he left with Brian Tribble, whom he had met 6 years earlier in a pickup game.
Brian Tribble was a friend of Leonard's who was from the Washington area. They met when they were younger. They met at a community youth playground. And because he was friends with Leonard, he was a big shot.
He was his entree to everything. And I think Brian Tribble looked at Len Bias and says, "That's my trip to the stars."
Court testimony later revealed that Bias and Tribble returned to Washington Hall about 2:30 a.m. and entered the room of players David Gregg and Terry Long. They brought with them a significant amount of cocaine.
Unfortunately, at that time, and perhaps even at this time, one of the ways you celebrated success was to have a party, and parties included drugs, alcohol, and women.
Cocaine was cool, it was glamour, it was glittery, it was glitzy. People weren't dying from cocaine yet. It was a status symbol. Time magazine had a cover with a martini glass full of cocaine, and cocaine, the new status symbol.
Len Bias was a product of that environment, of that mid-1980s environment where cocaine was not only in widespread use, but it was perceived to be not addictive. It was perceived to be cool and sporting to use it, especially in the jet set population.
There were a lot of people in Hollywood and in various sports that were using cocaine fairly freely, and for most of them, they didn't see that it had a downside, didn't see that it had consequences.
Terry Long, David Gregg, Bias, and Tribble ended up in this dormitory room together. They were in and out of the room all night long. Jeff Baxter, another player on the team who'd been close to Bias, came in, and he and Len talked about the day that Bias had just had in New York and Boston. According to the testimony, this mirror with this prodigious amount of cocaine was put out of sight.
Obviously, the liquor was there, so they were drinking, and everybody was emotional, but it wasn't something where he was hanging over or he couldn't stand up and walk or his balance, his equilibrium was off, because from what I saw, it was not. I should have told him, "Hey, come on, let's go to sleep." I should have just told him, "Come on, let's go to bed." And I didn't. It's not a day that doesn't go by, and I think about the fact that I should have made that statement. Very simple, very direct, and he would have done it. He would have done it.
And then Baxter went to bed, and the party continued. They got this mirror with the cocaine out of the drawer, and they resumed. And they were like, "We're getting wrecked. We're really getting into bad shape."
I think it was a party, a celebration that got out of control. I think the excitement of Len's draft status, going to his dream team, and those guys actually having fun, it got out of control.
A little bit of feeling that you're invincible, a little bit of overindulgence, and a lot of bad judgments.
They said to Bias, "Don't you think you ought to back off a little bit?" And he said, "I'm fine, I'm a horse, I'll be okay." And then he got up to try to go to the bathroom, and he wasn't able to walk. Sat back down on the bed, lay down then, and began to have what apparently was a seizure.
I said, "No, she was Len Bias, and he just went to Boston, and he needs some assistance."
What are you talking about?
Huh?
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about someone needs, Len Bias needs help.
Well, it doesn't matter what his name is. What's the problem?
He's not breathing right.
Brian Tribble calls for help for his friend, Len Bias. It's a plea that goes on for about 2 minutes, but it's most telling if you listen to his voice and you listen to his cries for help. In that tape, you can just close your eyes and imagine what is going on in that dorm room.
My name is Brian.
Brian what?
Tribble.
Tribble?
Yes, sir.
What's your phone number, Brian?
I'm in Len Bias's room. I don't know the phone number.
What's the room number?
1103.
1103?
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's just Washington Hall. What's the address of Washington Hall?
I don't know. There's no address for it. Just Washington Hall. Please come as soon as you can. It's no joke.
Okay, Washington Hall, apartment number 1103.
This is Len Bias. You have to get him back to life. There's no way he can die.
Finally, after this interminable period with Tribble on the phone to them, trying to convince them that they needed to come there, they did come.
When we got in there and realized what was going on, with Lenny laying diagonally across the floor in one of the bedrooms, we realized we had to get busy. Had no pulse, no breathing.
Lenny was laying on the floor, his eyes open, and it was a sight to see, again, a specimen of that stature, of that build, laying on the floor with no motion, helpless.
The expression on the faces of the people in the room were just total shock that they can't believe what's happening right before their eyes.
When the paramedic asked were there any drugs involved, I can't remember who gave that response, but the response was no.
6:30, 7 o'clock that morning, in our suite, we get a loud knock on the door. It was David Gregg, and he was out of breath. He was in a panic situation. He just kept saying, Lenny, 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 LB, LB. And we had to calm him down. It's like, what's going on? And then he told us what had happened. So all of us as a team got into our cars and went over to the hospital.
We could see some team members, some friends outside. They were in tears, and we stayed in front of that hospital for hours upon hours.
And I can remember my telling David, because I can remember me telling him, come here for a second. And we went for a walk into the corridors of the hospital. And I remember asking him, what were y'all doing? And I asked him 3 times. He didn't respond, but he was very, very upset. So then I asked him, were you all doing drugs? I'll never forget David's expression, the way he broke down when I asked him that question. He's 6'9" tall, so he's a very long guy. And it was just hard to see him buckle over, and he proceeded to just cry. And at that time, I realized what had went down, the fact that drugs were used.
To see the doctors walk out of that operating room and down that lonely hall, and then the one doctor come up to his family and saying it's over, it's done, he's dead.
I went into the room where he was, and they had the tube sticking out his mouth. And he was just laying there. And I couldn't believe he was dead.
Len Bias was brought to us at 6:50 this morning. He was in a full cardiorespiratory arrest. There was no heartbeat, no spontaneous respirations. During none of that time, was there any reconsciousness. There was no heartbeat, no response. And he died at 8:50 this morning.
I'm sad, but I'm not even worried because I know where Leonard is. I know he's in heaven. And I'm going to miss him, and I know everybody else here will too. And I really can't say a whole lot more except I love you, Leonard, and I'll miss you. I'll see you in heaven one day.
Welcome to Today on a Friday morning. As we head towards the weekend, we are reminded of the life and death of Len Bias and how tenuous life really is.
It was just not believable. You just couldn't believe that someone as vital, as strong as he was, could possibly be dead, and certainly not on this day, 24 hours after being drafted.